Cool. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and get started. First of all, seat check. We're here for supporting augmented teams without getting salty. So if you are in the wrong room, now would be a good time to relocate yourself so that I'm not in the middle of some really important part and you're like, you know, it's not for me, and then like get up and be disruptive. So if anyone needs to relocate, go ahead and do so. All right. We're all happy where we are. The first thing I want to do is start off with some terminology review. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this slang term, salty means to be dissatisfied or upset or bitter towards a certain situation. So, for example, I felt salty when I found out you all went to the bar without me last night. So it's just kind of setting the tone for the session. When I wrote the session and submitted it, I was in a very bitter place, and since then we've come to a better place, and so you're going to kind of hear the net result of that whole transition. Yeah, let's get started. So 2 years ago, I sat in front of you at Bad Camp and I talked about recruiting and retaining dedicated volunteers and teams, and talking about how you can grow a really good and healthy team of people who work really well together and have really good processes and just can produce really good things together. And then last year, I sat in front of you and talked about how Amazee has really good Agile processes and how we transitioned to Agile, and we continue to use Agile. And now I'm standing in front of you talking about kind of the culmination of these two things, plus some. So we're going to learn about how we're growing a healthy team internally, and then also merging with another team to make things awesome, all while using Agile together. So it's sort of taking both of those two skill sets and making something new and magical out of it. It's a nice progression over the last 3 years. Before I get started and actually tell you about the story, I want to do some usual disclaimers. This is a talk about what we're working on. The project is not done, so it's a very much of a work in progress. The things that I'm telling you now, if you ask me in 6 months, might be totally invalid and not relatable, or I will have changed what I have said based on just how things change. I do want to flag that this is the actual terms and conditions from Drupal.org. If you haven't read them, you can do so here. The names are not included of the people who are actually a part of this session, just because we're not done, and the things that I'm going to tell you are not importantly related to the specific client and the people that are involved. And another thing is that your mileage may vary. So if you have never done been part of an augmented team before, and this is like your first time experiencing what that could be like, none of this might make sense. It might make total sense, or you could be sitting there thinking, this is super obvious, why are you doing a session on it? And all of those things might be totally valid for you in your situation. All totally fine. Before I get into augmented teams, I wanted to also share that it's not exclusively a nerd thing. People have augmented teams in all kinds of situations, and I wanted to share one of them with you.
The Mines crosses the border.
Sullivan family disappeared in Barbados 8 hours ago.
In a case so big,
3 families, 3 countries in 3 years.
it will take 2 teams to solve it.
Mark you out of yours. We'll float for it.
So if you're not familiar with this super great TV show, in Criminal Minds, it was the announcement of a spin-off show that they were doing by having a case that was too big for one team to solve on their own, which is essentially like the beginning of all augmented teams. You have a project, it's too big for one team, you bring in a second team, boom. So a little bit about me. My name is Stephanie El-Hajj. I'm a project manager for Amazee Labs in Austin. I've been a project manager with them for almost 3 years. Prior to this, I was the program coordinator for DrupalCon, so used to dealing with lots of different teams, lots of different nationalities, and all different kinds of skill sets and personalities. So hopefully that will come through with what I'm going to say. That's me on our Austin couch. All of the Austin team has a picture of themselves on this couch. So my company is Amazee Labs. You might have heard of them. There's a few people here from our sister companies. We have been around for 10 years. We are started in Zurich, Switzerland. We have an office in Austin, Texas, which is where I am. We also have an office in Cape Town, South Africa, and we also have an entire distributed team. 2 people are like in Taiwan, and 1 is in New Zealand. So we're kind of all over the place. This picture is actually taken from our Amazee 10 retreat that happened last April in Cape Town, South Africa, and you might know this person in the middle who's actually taking the picture with his drone. This is Michael. You probably have seen him around at camps. So we're kind of everywhere and do all kinds of things, and yeah, that's us. And then I'd like to introduce the client to you. This is actually all pulled from the project that we released recently, so you might see it again in the wild later on. But basically what the client is they're a gigantic nonprofit. They're worldwide. Their job is to put money in a giant pool, donated from members, and then to take that money and to do good things with it all over the world. So our project with them was to make that possible. So what I want to do is, first of all, I wonder where that line is, but walk you through my decision tree for whether or not a client would actually need an augmented team. So you're thinking to yourself, why would they need an augmented team? They have a team. Well, there's a couple scenarios that you would need to walk through in order to realize, yeah, this is for me. So the first thing is, do I have all the internal resources? If you do, maybe you don't need an augmented team. You probably can just do it internally. Or you have all the bodies, but maybe they don't have the skills that you need. And so that would also be a reason to augment your team. Another decision that you might need to have is whether or not you want to bring in people internally and grow your internal team so that you have this person or this skill set available for whenever you need it long term. But you might realize that the project that you're doing is maybe only 9 months and you don't want to commit to a lifetime of this employee, so that's not going to work for you. Or you might want to do a contractor, but then you have to have someone manage the contractor, and that can be both expensive and time consuming if you especially are short on resources to even have that person available to do that. So if all these things are negative, then you will find yourself in a situation where you have a project that needs to get done, you either don't have the bodies, you don't have the skill sets, or you don't have just the resources available to handle it, and so you look for outside sources, and this is how we actually got pulled in on this project. Typically, Amazee Labs does not do augmented projects. This is our first one in Austin that we did. So this is going to be our story of how we became part of it, and also the things that we learned being on the augmenting side of this project. That's what happened. So some considerations that you want to take into account before beginning your augmented project is resources. So again, skill set, you want to make sure that the skills that you need are out there. You might not know what those skill sets are, and that's going to come up later in my presentation. Just bodies, like you might know exactly what needs to get done, you might know exactly what it's going to take to get there, but you just don't have enough people actually pounding on the keyboard to make it happen, so you need to add more bodies to do that. Another thing is time, the fallacy of you have a project that's due in 9 months, and if you just throw a bunch of people at it, it's going to get done really quickly, is totally not true. So when you're doing an augmented project, you want to make sure that you account for all the onboarding that's going to have to happen, like getting everybody up to speed, getting them all used to your processes and your deployments and all that kind of stuff. Just don't make the mistake of saying, like, if I throw a bunch of resources, it'll all happen magically. Totally will not. It'll blow up in your face. The other thing is that augmenting a team with another team is expensive. It's super, super expensive, so you basically have to be committed to spending lots of money for people that you're never going to see again after the project is over. So, this was the plan. We went in. For those of you unfamiliar, this is Napoleon Bonaparte. He's famous. So the plan was we were going to go and do a kickoff. It was going to be a 2-day kickoff. We were going to meet with the client. We were going to meet with all of their stakeholders. There was like 20 stakeholders. So just getting 20 stakeholders in the room for 2 days was like a miracle unto itself, but we did it. Most of the people who needed to be there were there, and they were there for most of the time. So miracle, great, totally on a good start for the project. We did all the things that you should normally do. We talked through requirements, we talked through roles, we did a RACI chart, and everyone got really excited about doing a RACI chart as a group and getting sign-off. We were all excited about that. And then we did a retrospective on the very last day of the 2-day kickoff. And we were like, hey, here's a thing we like to do. We like to do retrospectives. Let's practice doing some agile things together just to kind of get you all in the rhythm, because a lot of the stakeholders weren't part of like an IT team, and they didn't know what these things were. And so they were like, ooh, I'm part of development. This is exciting for me as well. And so they liked the idea of in the moment giving feedback on just the 2 days and being like, hey, it was really cool that we had 2 days. We wish we had more days. And just kind of getting that initial conversation started was a really good way to open the door for conversations are a good thing to have in the future. So here's what we did, like from a technical perspective, of just getting the project off the ground. They used Jira, we used Jira, but we decided to use our Jira for the project, which was a pretty good, which is a pretty big milestone for us, a win for us. Just as the team who's going to actually implement a lot of the tickets, it was easier for us because we do multiple projects at once and not have to like switch back and forth between 2 different Jira instances. That would be awful. So they decided to switch back and forth between 2 Jira instances, but it made our lives better, so great. The other thing is that we were going to use their Slack, which was fine, except for it wasn't plugged into our stuff, so it didn't like do the deployment notifications that we were used to, so that was kind of a bummer, but it worked because we were still able to like chat back and forth fine. The other thing that we did that we typically do with projects is we had the weekly PO check-ins, so that's my role as PM/PO, meeting with the person on their side who was going to tell us which tickets to implement, which to prioritize, like figuring out the requirements. So as far as we were concerned, we were in a great position to rock this project. As for the project itself, the thing that we were going to build was a donation app. What the donation app does is it allows users to donate money, and it allows the content editor to configure this app to do basically all the different things that you would ever want a donation app to do. Like, it has literally all the bells and whistles, it does all kinds of stuff, and it's just the be-all, end-all thing. So we're kind of in like the first phase of it. It's super customizable, and it's going to be used all over their different web properties, and so it's not just a matter of building a thing, it's building a thing that can be replicated in multiple different properties with different domains, different permissions, and all that kind of stuff. So it seems straightforward until you actually look at it, and then you realize it's a gigantic hairy monster. So the first inkling of trouble happened when we were actually at the kickoff, when we started talking about the deployments. We learned a little bit about their process. So, for those of you unfamiliar with this image, this is little Georgie from It, right before he is sucked down the storm drain by an evil clown. So the first inklings of trouble after the deployment issue was that we had lots of people leading this project, which was unfamiliar to us. Usually we're used to working with clients where it's very straightforward. They know that we're in charge of a thing. They just tell us what to do. We do it. They get the thing that they want. Everyone goes home happy. With this project, there were 3 project managers, and I was one of them. And then the project managers that were on the other side were also POs, which is what I also am. So like duplicate roles, duplicate hats, lots of people doing kind of the same thing. Except for on their side, the PO wasn't actually the person who could say yes or no to things, which made it even more difficult. So they actually had visionaries on their side, which was like another layer back, who was actually dictating. And so getting sign-off took a long time, and it also took going through a lot of different voices to make sure everyone got the same amount of stage time for what it was that they were trying to convince the rest of the team to do. So that was very complicated and messy, and lots of feelings got hurt because everyone kind of felt that they were in charge, but not everyone was in charge, and it was a mess. The other part was that we thought that we were all on the same page when it came to terminology, because we all speak English, and it turns out we don't. We found out very early that we had a lot of words that we used pretty frequently just to describe the Agile process that they used very differently. It's like when you find out that you have a textbook from like 4 versions ago, and you're like looking at the chapters and they don't line up, and you're wondering why. So this is just going to give you an example of how excited we got when we said the same thing, and just the process of getting there.
Mr. Slash. Spark.
They are trying to communicate. They are trying to connect.
Chinese black market. Yes! Yes!
They are trying to say the same thing.
So if you've never played this game, it's called Trying to Say the Same Thing. And that's kind of what it felt like when we were learning all the different terminology that we all had used every day, and just found out that they were wrong. So one of the things that we did is we created a Confluence page with a table inside of it, and we literally went through like timebox. What does timebox mean to you? To us, a timebox means like this meeting is going to go no more than 90 minutes. We're timeboxing it to 90 minutes. To them, timebox meant a sprint. So we had things like this where we were like, we're on the same page. We're not. Actually, we're not. So when we finally became aware of this disconnect, we got really excited, and we were like, okay, before we go, what do you mean by this? Okay, that's what you mean. Okay, great, we can go on to the next thing. was actually a really big deal. The next thing that we ran into, again, was deployments. So this is a child simplified version of the deployment process. It's missing some arrows, but just know that there's 3 buckets. Things happen. There's some numbers to indicate some things go in directions. And it was a mess, and it made people sad. And we tried very quickly to fix it and change it because it was taking so long to actually deploy. The first deployment meeting that we had was a 2-hour meeting, and we left with questions. Yeah. And then merge conflicts. So when you're working with your code base and then they have a code base and you're not going to actually deploy all the things that you have worked on in that sprint, and then they go and live in this gigantic branch, and then they go to die there sometimes because their team is too busy to actually test all your things, but they still need to test it on their UAT, but they haven't actually gone through code review, and then it just lives there for a really long time, so that when you work on new stuff and it has to go into the thing, and then your developers are crying at the couch and working on their laptop and they hate everything. So that was bad. We also learned that when you're estimating for a sprint and you're like, oh, we can do 90 story points, and then you realize we can't actually do 90 story points because we have to stop for 3 days because there's 3 days worth of merge conflicts, then you can't actually like retain velocity because your team has to completely stop in order to fix the fires. So that was something that we learned the hard way. The other thing that we ran into was that due to those 20 or so stakeholders and all the different departments who had to be involved with sign-off, sometimes work came to us at weird intervals. So even if someone was on vacation, it didn't mean that our launch date was getting pushed back. So what was happening is that we had to scramble at certain times to deliver what we were delivering, and sometimes it felt a little bit like this. We're the dog. So the cat and the kid are the project deadline. And the carpentry is the development. Because every time someone's on vacation, every time the requirement changed, every time the UX and design thing didn't actually get signed off and we had already started building it, this is what it feels like.
It looks like shit.
So I went through this entire presentation with my team before I got here, and I looked around like when the video ended, and they all kind of had this like white face of just like triggered. So another thing that we ran into was something that I think Felix actually dubbed Scope Genie, which I think is pretty clever. So one of the things that we ran into was when you're working with a client and they kind of know Drupal, they kind of know what Drupal can do and the expectations of what can be delivered, the requirements that they gave us kind of followed along that lines. But because we didn't actually end up using Drupal for a lot of what we ended up building, it kind of opened their eyes to all the different possible new things that they could require. So we call the Scope Genie because they had wanted this shiny silver thing, and then they realized they could get this shiny gold thing, and because they could get the shiny gold thing, well, what if there's a diamond thing that they could get? And what if they want a ham sandwich? And what about this? And what about this? Because everything that they were throwing at the project could absorb and do, which for us was like, well, we can do it, but maybe you should stop asking for all these shiny things because it's making it super complicated, and you still haven't moved the deadline. Okay, great. Yeah. The other thing that happens is that when you have to wait for sign-off from so many people is that you're racing, you're putting all of your other projects on hold, and you're going to get things done, and then they come to you and they say, oh, actually, we need to take a break for this week because we don't actually have any sign-off on stuff, so you'll be fine, and we'll just meet back up later, right? From an agency perspective, suddenly everyone's on Facebook, and that's a bad thing. Another thing that we ran into was that it wasn't just us plus client, it was us plus client plus third-party vendor that was handling all the payment processing. So the entire app that we are using is like a hybrid of our things and their things, and So it wasn't just us being like, let's build a thing with all of the things we know how to do. It was, let's build a thing, and here's a list of restrictions that you can't actually do because PCI compliance and accessibility and blah, blah, blah. And we ran into more and more things that we didn't realize were going to be a problem. For example, the vendor was in Germany, and so we have time zone differences. So while he's ending his day, we're beginning-ish our day. And so it's that thing of like, you go to bed, and the next morning something has been done, and all the tickets have been responded to, but they're not there the entire duration of your day. So it's kind of like magic fairies are responding to things. We also found out things like it's a business requirement that your entire app be accessible, and in this particular instance that means screen readers have to be able to read all of the labels in your app, which is a problem for them because they don't actually have their app designed to do that. And so when you look at the app, it's our section, their section, our section, and it's themed to look the same, but the screen reader sees our section, ghost, our section, so they don't see the middle part, and that's not something that we can control. It just had to be one of those things where we're like, maybe in the future that ticket will get answered on their side and you will get that thing that you want. But it's for us, being used to like delivering all the shiny packages, it was kind of a bummer to be like, here's the thing that we're giving you and here's the broken leg that goes with it, because we couldn't fix it. Yeah. And then again, React. So for this particular project, React was the right tool for the job. And it can do all kinds of magic things. It's the front end word for whatever it is that we're trying to build. It makes it so that we have this super flexible framework. But the problem is that we didn't know actually how to build with it. Our team had never used React. Our Zurich team had used React, so we knew that React was possible, but it also didn't change the fact that the delivery was here, and we still had to deliver by that date and also learn React. So one day we went to the team and said, hey, so we're going to use React for this, so we're gonna learn React. And there was various faces that looked back at us as a result of that. But we were able to do it. It was just one more burden in like the pile of growing things that had to be overcome, also with a deadline looming. So as you can imagine, the team was totally happy with all the things that were going on. And we were able to deliver the first increment. We did it. But looking back on it afterwards, the team was like, you know what, let's just never do this. Like the client will be fine if we just walk away. We don't need money. This is fine. So our first mistake by approaching this project was that we treated the project like a regular project. We didn't think, hey, this is going to be different. It's going to require different things. We can go in doing all the things that we're so used to. We can put it through our process. It'll be great. In fact, it didn't. And it wasn't. And so what we did is we had to come to Jesus internally, and we were like, okay, the client's the worst. What do? We all hate everything. We don't want to come to work. We're all going to quit. It wasn't that bad. But it was just that idea of finally everyone broke kind of as a collective, and we were like, we cannot do this. We need to fix things. So we brought back the retrospective. We called the client. We called the third-party vendor, who was actually pretty involved, both on the client side and on our side, and we said, let's talk. We have things to say. And this was a really good event to have happen, just because we had not had this conversation with them. We had not had feelings with them. We had just had delivery and like being efficient and making sure that we were there for them and like not letting them down. And when we had this retrospective, we were kind of able to air all the grievances, and they had grievances too, which we would not have expected. We were like, you're the client, we're giving you the thing you want, you're fine. They were also sad, which was like refreshing to hear, like we're all sad together. Oh, okay, good. And it sort of leveled the field, so it wasn't just us being like, this is broken. It was like, oh, everything's broken, but you're also aware of that. Okay, great. So it was a nice way to reset the conversation. And it needed to happen, otherwise everyone would have been sad. So plan 2 was we changed our perspective. We talked to the client. The client was amazing about this. We were like, we're sad. We want to change things. And they were like, cool. How do you want to change things? And if you're on an augmented team and you sit down with your client and you have that conversation and they go fix it yourself, then you're in trouble, because basically the rest of my slides will not be any help to you at all. But if you have a client who says, okay, I hear the words you're saying, you're sad, let's fix it, and then they actually fix it, you can continue to watch my slides. Because a lot of the things that get accomplished, nothing would have actually changed if it was just our side that did the changing. It would have just been us like band-aiding our feelings of sadness until one of us exploded. So the first thing that happened was that the PMs all had to come to Jesus and said, like, where's the line in the sand? Who does what? And figuring out kind of like who gets what's part of the project. And we all kind of stuck to that part of the project. And that really, really helped. What's yours? What's mine? What's ours? And figuring out like how to create our own internal cycle of sharing information and relaying requirements and letting people know that like statuses have changed. So now we're in a really good place. And all the people who were involved in that like feel confident in their role there. So there's no more hurt feelings, which is huge. Another thing that happened, and I mentioned this in my session description, is that we went from having some meetings to all the meetings. And when you have 20 or so stakeholders and all the different groups involved, you can't avoid meetings. Meetings are your life now. So we started having breakouts for the PMs, talking about different things. We had like a scope conversation, we had budget conversation, we have, where are we on these tickets conversations. The development team broke out specifically with their dev team, and they would have powwows. And the cool thing about this is that they were able to have these ad hoc powwows without me, which typically wasn't the way it went before. Typically I was kind of there as the I'm going to make sure that you speak to clients like people, which they didn't need. They could totally speak like people to clients because they're people and so are the clients. And so just having them have this own ownership of who they need to talk to, figuring out those meetings on their own, took a lot of burden off me. I didn't have to coordinate it. I didn't have to sit there and pretend like I understood what they were saying. They were able to have the nerdy conversations that they needed to have, and then they could just kind of move on and be happy. Our UX and designer was able to meet one-on-one with their UX and design person, and so they were able to get a lot more done that way, scheduling the demos with the visionaries that we didn't have to have our entire team available to coordinate with, sped things up considerably. And our designer is really good at just putting things in gentle, good words, and so it's just calming to kind of put him in front of these people because they hear what he's saying much easier than if I were saying it, for example, where I'm just a lot more abrasive and direct. And so that works out a lot better. We have one daily stand-up, which was huge for us. We merged our internal team stand-up with their internal team stand-up, and we also added our third-party vendor. And the reason that we did that is because that once-a-week meeting just wasn't cutting it. So we were... days would happen between check-ins. We were losing time on just having a third person to talk through to the third-party vendor. It was just making this horrible telephone chain, and the right questions weren't being asked or answered. So we put everyone on the stand-up at 9 o'clock every morning. That's where you are. The one thing that we tried to do with this, again, was us trying to be well, maybe we can do something special for us that we stopped doing was we had the 9 o'clock with them where we worked on their project, and then we had the 9:15 with us where we talked about the things that we would normally talk about, and that took our 15-minute stand-up to half an hour every morning, and it was the absolute worst. So again, we went and talked to the client, and we were like, hey, here's what we've been doing with our internal stand-up. How do you feel about the fact that we share that we're working on projects that aren't your projects during stand-up? Because that was our biggest concern, is that we didn't want the client to be like, why are you working on those 4 other projects when my project is coming up? And they were like, no, we actually want to know when you're working on other projects because it gives us an idea of how busy you are and whether or not we can expect certain things, and it's good to have that transparency into what you're working on so that we're not just like, oh, and then they ghosted for 4 days. So that really worked out. And then we do deployment check-ins every time the merge conflicts get so bad, which they still do sometimes just because that's just the nature of merge conflict, or of development. We now have pretty frequent deployment check-ins, and we can talk to their dev and be like, okay, let's fix this. We have a process for fixing this. Another thing that we did is we changed the deployment process. We got rid of one of the third column of this, and we implemented our own hosting system to get it all off the ground. I don't know the details of it specifically, but if you want to know about it, quick plug, the Amazee IO team is downstairs. You can go see their little setup, but this basically took us from a sad burning situation to a much happier sigh of relief situation, and our developers and even their developers are quite happy with the whole deployment process. So one of the things that I'd like to mention is that we came in with a second plan. We knew what we were going to do, but we wanted to be flexible about our approach. We didn't want to say, here's a second approach, and this is what we're going to do forever. As I already mentioned, we went in with the stand-up, assuming that we were going to do 2 stand-ups, and we were like, that's not going to work. So the idea that even our process goes through iterations is hugely important for us to work together, because we go in with the intention of having something happen and then find out very quickly, or maybe not quickly, that what we're doing is bad and there's better ways to do it. And so just having that open conversation and say, hey, client, or they can even come to us and say, hey, you, let's fix this thing, and then we tweak it together so that, like I said, in 6 months you might come and say, hey, how are things going? And I might tell you a completely different set of things. We might have changed it by then. I don't know. Another thing that we did is we brought in a coach. We brought in a Scrum coach to be kind of our third-party outside auditor and say, he joined us for a week. He watched us with all of our clients, not just the main client, and he saw how we did. He just like day in a life of a Scrum team, and we said, watch what we do. Tell us if we're broken. That was what we were most concerned about. Like, how broken are we, doctor? And he came in and he was like, here's some things you could improve. Here's the things that you're doing that are fine. Here's some things that the client's doing that maybe they don't know that they're doing and maybe we can fix. And that was enlightening because we didn't know that the client can be broken when it comes to like certain of these processes. And we had the conversation with the client. We said, hey, this is our Scrum coach. He's going to watch us because we think we're broken and we want to know how broken we are. And they were like, great. Do that. Bring him to these things. And then as a result, afterwards, we had like a powwow with them, and we were like, here's what our Scrum coach found out. We're not dying, which is great. Here's some things we could fix. Here's some things that you could fix. And do you want him to come back in a week and like talk more about how we can improve things? And they were like, yes, do these things. We like improving. We like being better. So again, get clients who respond that way if you can. A thing that we did for React is that we brought in an expert. So as I mentioned, our Zurich team had done React projects. They'd actually launched a giant publishing website, this gigantic like year-long project that did all the things and all the diamonds and the golds and all these things. So we actually had someone on our team who was familiar with React and could teach us. So we flew in Fubi for a week. He came down to Austin. He sat with the team. He looked through the code that we had built for increment 1, and he was like, okay, first of all, this all needs to die. So we refactored all the code. We told the client, hey, so remember that one time when we built this thing? We're actually going to refactor all of it because there's some things that could be better. And they responded, great. We want it to be better now, not 6 months from now when everything explodes and catches fire. So go ahead and fix it. Again, get a client who responds that way. So Fubi went through the code. He did a workshop with the team. He did code reviews for the entire duration that he was there. And then when he left, he continued to do code review on all of the React tickets until he was in such a place with the team where he was like, you don't need me anymore. And he like pushed them off to sea. And it's great because now our team can do all of the code review internally. And like now we're like 6 months into the project. Like React doesn't even scare them anymore. They used to break out in cold sweat. Now they're fine. So that was an amazing change. Now the Mushi slide. So as a PM, we are used to being in control of all things and being responsible for all things. And if anything breaks and dies, it's our fault immediately. And one of the things that I had to learn as project manager for specifically this project, and I'm trying to apply it now to other projects, is that you have to trust the process. And when things get really messy and you like want to just go in and just grab it as hard as you can and fix it and just fix it, you have to actually stop. You have to step back and you have to rely on processes, you have to rely on your team, and you have to just kind of trust that everything is going to be okay, which is the terrifying part. But the good thing is that I have a really good team. My team is completely capable of taking care of the things that they need to do. I trust them with the code. I trust them to make build decisions. I trust the PMs on the other side, which was a huge thing to do. Just because they do things that's differently from me, it doesn't mean that it's wrong, which was a huge takeaway for me. And getting there was actually the result of having a conversation with our Zurich team and realizing that those PMs did things completely differently than me. But somehow they were still able to be an agency and make money and not close. So I guess it's okay that people do things differently. And then the final thing is just that the client wants us to do well. We want to deliver a really good product. And so at the end of the day, like, we're all kind of in the same boat trying to get to the same goal. And keeping that in mind helped kind of ease any tensions whenever potential conflicts or flare-ups kind of hit the horizon. And now a throwback to my slides from 2 years ago. This is a scene from one of the Marvel ones. There's so many right now. It's called Getting... It's at the very end of the movie, after they have destroyed whatever it was they destroyed in that movie. They're clearly busted. Like, the shop that they're in is in tatters, and they're eating shawarma. This is my stop and get shawarma moment that I think all teams kind of miss out on. It's the idea that after you've completed whatever it is that you're doing, whether or not you raced across the finish line and did like an amazing job, or you kind of like limped across the finish line, or someone had to drag you across the finish line, or everything around the finish line is on fire, like, you just get to the finish line and you come together as a team to heal, to talk about all the things that you did, to figure out how you can do it better next time. And it's just a really good way to remind him that there's just more than one person involved in it. It's just a really good way to take a break, to reflect on what happened, and to come together as a team to move forward for increment 2 of the project. So where we are currently, the team is less stressed. I'm giving a presentation on how your team can be less stressed. The client is happy. The phase 1 of the project has been released. People are using it. Positive feedback is coming in. We are moving forward, and we are having good conversations about how to continue moving forward. We're in such a good place that things have happened, like on the client side, where people have taken really long vacations, requirements have changed, like all these things that had we been like where we were in increment 1 happened, we probably would have derailed it and caught fire and like be drinking Pepsid. But now we're in a place where we can kind of be flexible to all these changes, and when they come in, we kind of know how to embrace them and say, we're going to get over this, like, we'll move on to the next thing, the sun will come up tomorrow. So where we are now, we're actually very excited about this project, working with this client, what we're building. So if this wasn't as meaty as you would have liked it to be, like on the tech side, on the deployment side, rest assured, a lot of nerdy blog posts are coming. We're going to write about React, we're going to write about the deployment process, we're going to write about all the different things we were able to do with this third-party vendor. We're very excited about sharing our discoveries and how we got here with other people. It's something that Amazee takes really seriously. We're going to share case studies so you can kind of see like the shiny version of what it looks like without all the messy duct tape holding it all together. And when the app is finally released in like its true form next year, I hope you guys all take the chance to go and play with it and see if you can break it, and also donate to it, because the client is doing really good things, and it would be really cool to kind of push that back into the world. Does anybody have any questions?
You decided to choose React.
It was actually the development team, and it was because the app that we were going to use with a third-party vendor, it was something to do with iframes. Basically what they were going to try and do broke stuff, and they were like, let's never do iframes, and then React became the best way to display it.
What was the dev team you were working with on their side? How many people and what kind of roles?
So their dev team is actually huge. We only got like a portion of it who were like put on our project, so they've got like a web ops and a dev ops and an IT and a something, and we have one person that we see frequently, but there are more that hide behind him. I don't know if that answers it. There's a lot of people over there.
How about your team as well?
Our team is 5 developers and a UX person. Yeah. Cool. All right. If you guys want to chat with me afterwards, you can totally do that. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah. Otherwise, thanks for coming. I hope this song gets stuck in your head forever.
Is that one of your first slides?